Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Art of Making Things Happen, the podcast with me, Steve Sims. Now, let's be honest, you're an entrepreneur, you're a businessman, you focus on your scaling, your advertising, your marketing, your website, you scale on all of that kind of stuff, focusing on the customer acquisition. But how often do you focus on those people within our walls? Our family, our employees. Now, we all know that there's been a mass resignation going on all over America and all over the world. How is that going to impact us over the next few years? What are the employees thinking? What are they valuing? And how do we keep them? How do we train them so smart enough that they can leave, but love them so much that they want to stay? I've got a very good friend of mine, Joey Coleman, on the line. He's going to be going through this. He's writing a book about it. So listen to Joey Coleman on how you can be focusing on the thing that really matters within your business, the business itself, the employees. Listen to the show and enjoy it. Hey, Joey, welcome to the show.
Hey, Steve, always a pleasure to get the chance to reconnect. And thanks to everybody listening in and watching. Really looking forward to today's conversation.
Now, it's been, what's it been like? Five years? Maybe 5 years since the last time we spoke?
I think so. I mean, you haven't aged a minute, which is great. But yeah, it's definitely been a while since we've had the chance to connect. So I'm excited for our conversation.
Now, we both met at Mastermind Talks, which was the phenomenal Jason Gaynard. He does an amazing event. He had me speak at it. Wisely, he only had me speak there once, but you spoke a couple of times. And I was always enamored by your passion of talking about experience. Now, I've got a tiny little thing that it says about you from your company. Joey Coleman, and I love this, is the chief experience composer at Design Symphony. Now, I had to repeat that verbatim because it's just so beautifully done. But you really focus on the experience of the customer and the experience of the employee. But what does that actually mean to you, and why should it be important to us?
Well, I think at the end of the day, most businesses spend a lot of time thinking about their product. What are we going to make and put into the marketplace? How much are we going to charge for it? How are we going to support it? How are we going to get as many people as possible to buy it or to sign up for it? But they have a tendency to forget about what happens after someone becomes a customer. They spend all this time thinking about acquisition and growth and how do we expand and scale. But they don't spend as much time thinking about, all right, once they're in the door, what do we do to keep these customers that we work so hard to get? Or what do we do to keep these employees that we work so hard to get? And so to me, experience has to do with feelings and perceptions. Whereas, a lot of businesses focus on customer service, which to me is what you do to help a customer. Customer experience is what you do to create a feeling in that customer. And at the end of the day, people are going to remember how you've made them feel. They're going to talk about how you made them feel. Very few people are like, oh man, check out this new software I signed up for. It's got 17 features and benefits. No, they're going to say, hey, I signed up for this new software and it's made my life easier. It's made my life better. This program has made things more exciting for me. And as a result, I kind of have a tendency to over-index on the experience side of the conversation. And we've been able to see great results with audiences around the world.
Yeah, you've spoken at some of the biggest brands in the planet. You've spoken, and you're constantly in demand, not only speaking on stages, but speaking in companies about the experience. But here's something I want to kind of drill down a little bit more on. People are very easy to give facts and provide parameters. You want a blue cake, here's a blue cake. You want 16 features, here's 16 features. But giving someone a feeling and a perception, and those were your words, that's scary because it can't be quantified. The feeling that we're going to install, or we're going to hope you're going to have of my service and product, is going to be potentially different to somebody else's based on what their expectation. This is all very vague stuff, but you've jumped into the deep end and gone, hey, don't run away from it, master it. How do you get people to take it seriously?
Yeah, well, Steve, I think it can be vague. And I think for years people have thought, well, it's impossible to quantify these things. But in my experience, it can actually be quite specific and trackable and measurable. Here's what I mean by that. If you and I decided that at a certain point in the customer journey, we want our customer to feel heard, We want them to feel seen. We want them to feel heard. We want them to feel like they matter, that we're paying attention. And anybody listening were to think about, well, in your life, what are the things that made you feel heard, made you feel seen? Things like looking someone directly in the eye, things like asking, how is this going for you? And genuinely listening, as opposed to, I'm going to read you the survey and say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how are we doing? And by the way, if you put 5, I get a promotion. No, asking the people and genuinely listening to what they have to say, and then feeding it back to them in a way that lets them know they've been heard. You know, you and I have talked a lot about this. I liken this stuff to dating. Right? Because at the end of the day, everybody who's listening, regardless of what kind of industry you're in, has probably had some experience with a personal relationship, whether that's dating or a marriage. And if you wanted the person in your marriage to feel seen and to feel listened to, there's some pretty basic things you can do. Why is it that we're able to do that in our personal lives if we focus on it? But suddenly we get over to the business world and we're like, oh, that's too squishy. That's too emotional. That's not what we need to do. And it's like, no, you're serving another human being. That's exactly what you want to do.
So we are in the people business, and I'm always amazed at how many people turn around and say, well, don't take it personally, it's just business. Do you think we've gone past that stupid saying?
You know, I don't think we've gotten past it. I wish that we had, but I think what we found is that type of ridiculous belief of, well, this is work, that's personal, keep them separate, is, coming home to roost. And we've certainly seen that on the employee side of the experience in the last year and a half, where people are resigning their jobs. They're leaving their jobs at higher levels, at least here in the United States, than at any other time in 20 years that we've been tracking this data. And what's really surprising is they're leaving the jobs not knowing what the next job is going to be. Now, there's some huge insight there for employers, right? It's one thing if an employee leaves to go work for a competitor or to take a better paying job or because they have to move to something. But what we're seeing in unprecedented numbers is people just saying, you know what? I'm fed up with this. I'm leaving. Now, some of the folks listening may say, well, Joey, that's because we gave them all this stimulus money, or Joey, that's because people just don't want to work anymore. I think it's actually much deeper than that. I think it's because the average employee has realized that they're not interested in trading their life for minimum wage. They're not interested in trading every moment of their waking existence for a boss or a manager that says, yeah, I know you've got someone sick in the hospital right now, but you need to be at work. Yeah, I know it's your kids' play and, they're in second grade and this is kind of the culmination of what they've been working on all year. But you know what? You need to be in the office or else take a vacation day. And by the way, we're going to only give you 5 vacation days a year, or whatever it may be. I think what's happening is humans are realizing that they're more interested in the human side of human being instead of the being doing side that often humans have a tendency to over-index on.
I don't disagree with you, but look, neither of us are spring chickens. So both of us have had, we've had to do work, and a lot of people out there listening to this, we've all had to do shit we didn't want to do. Work is not always pleasurable. As I've always said, you do the stuff you don't want to do so you can do more of the stuff you do want to do. Now, if you're unhappy about packing shelves or, packing the boxes in the Amazon call center, well, you're trying to earn a living to keep the lights on and to make a better life. There's always going to be that trade-off. Do you not think that possibly the stimulus packages and the handouts that I've seen that has in some cases been more than what they were earning has given them maybe a slightly an inaccurate way of looking at the future? And is it not going to come around and bite our ass?
Well, I think it's going to come around and bite those folks that think that it was only the stimulus. Absolutely. Now, did the stimulus contribute to this? Has some of the circumstance over the last few years contributed to it? Sure. But if we actually look at the data and we look at the research, we find that it doesn't hold up. We find the number of quits, the number of people leaving their positions for no new position happening at the highest levels of employment, where the stimulus package either didn't go to them because financially they didn't qualify for it, or those folks didn't accept the stimulus package for varying reasons. So the data actually is counterintuitive. Now, I understand and I respect you and I not being spring chickens, having been around the block a little bit, that it is easy for older generations to make this about, well, this is just young kids not wanting to work. This is just young kids not willing to put in the time like we did. The problem with that kind of knee-jerk reaction that I'm guilty of having too, I'm not saying you're wrong if you're having that reaction, is that the data doesn't support it. The facts don't support it. And so as a result, I've spent the last 5 years, as I've been working on this next book, diving deeper into what is actually causing the behaviors. And I think if we look deeper, we find that the companies that focus on creating remarkable employee experiences and remarkable customer experiences actually grew their business during the pandemic. They're not fighting to fill positions like a lot of other organizations have. They have long lists of people wanting to apply from their jobs. They have waiting lists for new customers as well. Why? Well, the research shows it's because they've focused on that human to human connection that you and I were speaking about earlier. They are treating their customers and their employees like people instead of like transactions. And I think if we fast forward a decade or more into the future, if you are not a business that is focused on creating great experiences for both your employees and your customers, and by the way, when you do that, they feed on each other, right? A great employee experience creates a great customer experience and vice versa. You will not be in business. If that is not a priority in your organization, you will not exist because the opportunities for work are so much greater than they used to be. So let's take it on the employee context. When you and I were growing up, and I say this respectfully, we're dating ourselves a little for those that are just listening. Steve and I've got a little bit of gray hair going on, all right? When we were growing up working, as a teenager, as somebody in your young 20s, you pretty much took a job that was within 20 miles of your house. Because the commute and the amount of time getting there, that was the limited pool that you can work with. I've got a brother who's in his 20s, right? My younger brother. He can work for any company in the world as long as he has an internet connection. That is remarkably different from when you and I were coming up. So the pool of potential jobs that are available to someone under 30 compared to what they were 30 years ago for you and I is dramatically different. It's exponentially larger. And I don't think most employers have realized that. I think most employers are like, well, yeah, but come on, where else are you going to work? Flip burgers? And it's like, no, I'm going to go work for a company that's based in another country, but I'm going to remote in and work on my own schedule and provide the work they need, and they're going to love to work with me. Or I'm going to do currency arbitrage with an employer in a different environment. I'm going to move to a place that has a much lower cost of living and get paid a higher salary and be able to your point, have that remarkable life that I wanted to have with less hours worked at a higher wage in a different currency. The game has changed. The problem is a significant number of employers haven't figured that out yet. And they're learning a hard lesson. They're learning right now because they're like, oh my God, we're offering $20 an hour and we still can't get qualified applicants. Folks, it isn't about how much you offer. It's about what are they going to do when they get there. And if you haven't figured out how to make the experience remarkable for the employees coming into your workplace or working on your team, you're going to be playing catch up for the rest of the time you're in business.
Wow, that's a lot deeper. A lot of the employees, as you say, we look at the acquisition, we look at the customers, we look at our brand, we look at the culture that we are exercising to our customers and our clients. And we look at our workforce quite often as a liability, something that we have to pay, like putting gas in a car. So the fact that you're actually changing the perspective on that. Now you're working on another book, and I think it doesn't come out until next year. Is that correct?
Correct. It comes out in April of 2023. It's going to be called Never Lose an Employee Again. My first book was called Never Lose a Customer Again.
Yeah.
This is basically the companion book to that, which is all about what can you do from the first moment that someone hears about your brand and thinks, I might like to work for them someday, up through the point where that person is a valued, engaged employee who is actually recruiting their friends and family to come work for you too. How do we navigate that journey? What do we do as employers to create the kind of remarkable experiences that will allow us to recruit, to onboard, to engage, and ideally retain the very best talent we can.
So let's break it down. A lot of people are entrepreneurs that are listening to this show, okay? And they're entrepreneurs with businesses that, have got 40, 50, hundreds of staff. But most people, most entrepreneurs now, especially with the ability to kind of like VA their business, have anywhere up to 10 employees. How should they be focusing on their employees to make sure they don't suddenly have a gaping void with those?
Steve, I love this question. I love this question because you hit immediately to the thing that most businesses fail to recognize. They focus on what is Netflix doing? What's Apple doing? What's Amazon doing? Those folks have cities of employees. Cities. They have to be thinking about things that your 8-person company is not going to have to think about for decades, if ever. Okay? That's just the nature of employment and growth and entrepreneurialism. Here's the thing that most businesses need to focus on. Instead of limiting the number of people they hire to who responds to my job posting, they need to be thinking more strategically and more long-term about how do I want to position myself in the marketplace? What type of employer do I want to be? How do I want to attract certain types of people to come work with me who will be able to augment my experience? Let me give you a specific example about this. We have a mutual friend, a gentleman by the name of Michel Falcone. Okay. He's a Canadian restaurateur, really interesting guy. He opened a quick service restaurant, which is the industry part, jargon, if you will, for a fast food place, right? Up in Canada called Brasa. And stop and imagine the typical fast food restaurant. Picture in your mind the type of employees they have, how dedicated and engaged they are, and maybe some of the issues they have about, I don't know, people showing up for work, people willing to do quality work, people willing to go the extra mile for a customer and not have to be told everything they need to do. I just did an interview with Michel where we were talking about one of his newest locations. Okay, their location has been open for 7 months. During that 7 months, everyone that they've hired has stayed. They've had 0 resignations or quits. By the way, that's in an industry that has annual turnover of 150%. Yeah. So by now, they should have lost everyone they hired. Oh, and by the way, they've lost no one that they hired. But more interesting than that is they've not had a single person show up late to work. Well, stop and think about that. How many times have you been at a restaurant where they're like, I'm sorry, we're understaffed, or, it's going to take a while because 3 cooks didn't show up today, or 4 servers didn't show up today, or whatever. Anyone who has gone to a restaurant in the last 18 months in North America, and frankly, globally, has experienced something like that. Why? What's the difference? Well, Michel breaks it down in a number of things, which I'm going to talk about in the book. But to pull out a couple of insights, number one, he pays his employees a starting wage. That's what he calls it, not a minimum wage, a starting wage. And it is built into their hiring that they know that every 3 months, they're going to have a review to see if a raise is appropriate. Every 3 months. Now, some employers are saying, oh my gosh, Joey, I don't want to meet with my team every 3 months to give them more money. Well, why not? No, seriously, why not? Why don't you want to meet with your team on a regular basis to look at how they are performing their duties and whether the value they are providing to your organization merits continuing to keep them at that level of duties or adding more duties and as a result, more responsibilities and as a result, more compensation? To me, it seems like if we're building businesses for the long term, we should be focused on treating our employees for the long term. North of 60% of the businesses in the world, Steve, spend less than 1 week training their employees. Less than 1 week. But I'm guessing most business owners would like their employees to stay around more than 1 week. Why is it that we think, well, if I just invest a week in this is going to be okay? Again, let's go back to dating. You're happily married. I'm happily married. If we would have thrown in the towel at the 1 week mark with our significant others, you and I would both be bachelors. Yeah. That's just the harsh reality. You got to keep investing into your team. So what are you doing to build long-term careers for your people instead of short-term transactions?
You're unloading a lot there. I remember a while back when I was looking to get people involved in my concierge firm, and I was really trying to find out the perfect employee that I wanted to bring into the company. I met a gentleman in Palm Beach who turned around and said, "Stop focusing outside of your company, focus inside your company, look after all of those, and have people want to be part of that." So a mutual friend of ours, Cameron Harold, talks about hire on culture, skill set you can teach. So how important is a culture within your environment and when you're looking at retaining your employees?
I think at the end of the day, it's probably the most important thing. But here's the challenge, Steve. A lot of business owners think that culture is about free sodas in the break room, a ping pong table, or a foosball table.
Yep.
It's like, no, folks.
The
That's
visuals.
not cultural. Those are little nice perks to have, and those are great. Don't get me wrong. But culture is, do I feel like I have a voice in this organization? Do I feel like if I see something going wrong, I'm empowered to say, why do we do it that way? That seems foolish. We should do it this way. We could make it better this way. I was talking to a chiropractor the other day who's going to be a case study in the book as well. And one of the interesting things he does with his employees is he says every quarter there is a prize to be won. It's $1,000 cash prize. And the prize goes to the employee who suggests an idea for how to make their business better. And then he looks at all the ideas, he picks one, that person wins $1,000, and they get to implement, then they lead that project to implement that change in the business. Now, when I asked him about this, Steve, I was like, oh my gosh, $1,000. You're throwing $1,000 to some random employee every quarter. He's like, Joey, I'm thinking about switching it to every month. Because the ideas I get from my team not only are really moving the dial in terms of what we can do, but he said the best players on my team want to win the prize. They're coming up with even better ideas. They're pairing up and saying, hey, here's my idea. What's your idea? Let's combine them to make a super idea. And we'll split the $1,000 prize. What it's doing is it's building cohesion. It's building culture. It's building connection. If you ask the average person, who are your best friends? They will talk about some of their coworkers. They will talk about their colleagues at work. Why? Because it's where we spend the most of our time. So why aren't we as employers fostering those types of connections? You know, there's a lot of employers out there that are like, I don't want any of the employees dating each other. I really don't want you hanging out outside out of work. Just come to the office, do your work, and go home. Go live your lives. Okay, I understand why you might think that. But if this is where your employees are going to spend the bulk of their days, and you've got employees, for example, who are sub 30, this is the bulk of their social life. What are you doing to promote that, to encourage that? Because now you have employees who are diving in that see their place of work as their place of connection, their place of life, their place of excitement. It changes the conversation.
I remember Elon Musk. I went up to his Fremont factory for Tesla, and I was speaking to a couple of the directors up there, and they were talking about the gamification within the factory. And you've got this car factory that makes cars, and pretty much a third to maybe, well, way more than that now, of the operations in the factory are handled by machines. So you think that it's pretty much, an automated, industry there. And he turns around and says about gamifying it. If you can come up with a way that we can make this better, you win a prize. And it's this whole kind of gamification, but also gives you pride. It breeds pride in your work because you're now responsible for that new way something is done. And if you think about it, both of us consult, both of us teach. We're a lot more expensive than $1,000 every quarter. So
absolutely.
And we show up. And we're there for a month, and we've got to come up with some brainstorming ideas that's going to change your business. That employee has slept it, ate it, and tasted it for a year. They know way more than the consultant or the business practitioner that's turned up yesterday. So I think that's a great idea. I wonder how many people are going to start doing that. And it doesn't have to be $1,000. You can go, look, here's a $500 restaurant voucher, whatever. But something to start getting the juices flowing that, hey, this is part of your future as well. How can you be the solution to making it better for you? I love that. Are we scared, though, of giving employees too much power?
Oh, only the majority of leaders, Steve. Only the majority of leaders, not all of them. Now, here's the thing. For so long, our business hierarchy has been built on this misconception that me growing the team below me means that those people are going to be promoted past me, and then I'll be working for them someday. Well, first of all, would that necessarily be such a bad thing? If you had the reputation for the fact that everyone who came to work for you went on to bigger and better things, do you think you would necessarily, like a magnet, attract the very best talent in the world? Yes, you would. And there are lots of people that do this. You know, it's interesting. I was reading an interview with the HR team from Netflix, and they said early on they had decided that they wanted all of their employees to be able to say, Netflix was the greatest place I ever worked. Worked, past tense. That they were okay with people leaving. But when they left to go do something else, they wanted them to look back and think fondly on their time there. That's the other thing I think a lot of businesses fail to recognize, Steve. And I've got some case studies in the book that are about universities and colleges because they've figured this out. If you go to university, you're kind of expected to finish up in 4 to 5 years. I know some folks are on the 8-year plan, the 10-year plan, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the business model is kind of set up to cycle you through in 4 years. But what do those schools really want you to be? They want you to leave smarter than you arrived. They want you to leave more independent and more visionary than when you arrived. And they want you, when you leave, to think back fondly on your time there, so much so that you will continue to give them money and encouragement and support and referrals for the rest of your days. Why is it that most business leaders are irritated that an employee wants to spend 3 or 4 years there and then leave and go work something else? That should be something you presume. You should presume that you are not going to have lifelong employees. Instead, you should go into it with the attitude of, how can I maximize the contribution that I give to this employee and maximize the value that I get from this employee during their tenure? Because if you do that, you having raving fans out there saying, oh my gosh, best boss I ever had, Steve Sims. Best company I've ever worked at, Netflix, whatever it may be. That's how you create advocates in the marketplace.
I wonder how many entrepreneurs are listening to this now thinking, would our staff say that?
Yeah,
and that's
a great question.
That's a great benchmark. It's a great litmus test. It's a great way of actually looking at it and going, how well are you doing at your job? Would they say this is the best place they've ever worked? And I remember there was a famous quote from Richard Branson that says, train them good enough that they can leave, love them enough so they'll want to stay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
that was a good one.
It is. And, the counter quote to that one often is, the head of the company, when they say, oh, we want to spend more money on training or onboarding, and they go, oh my gosh, what if we train them up and they leave? And the head of people says, well, what if we don't train them and they stay?
Ooh.
Something to think about, right? My theory is, when you are investing in making your employees smarter, faster, stronger, better, more resilient, more creative, more intuitive, fill in the blank, whatever modifier, magnifier, enhancer you want to have, that produces more value for you. Going back to the company I was talking about, the quick service restaurant, right? The fast food place. One of the things that Michel talks about is talent density. He looks for hiring an employee that will produce the value of an employee and a half. Now, stop and think about this for a second. See, it took me a while to wrap my head around this. I was like, wait a second, value did. What do you mean by that? More value? You mean they'll work more? And he's like, no. It's not that they'll spend more hours. It's that an hour of their time is worth 1.5 hours of the time of someone else that could fill this position. So now, for all the entrepreneurs listening, who are the most talent dense members of your team? the highest talent density. The person that you're like, oh man, an hour with Steve Sims is like 5 hours with Philip McKernan. I'm just teasing. That's a mutual friend of ours, right? Whatever it may be.
He's not a friend of mine. So let's
Steve's
not
like,
go
I
that
don't
far.
want to acknowledge his friendship.
Yeah.
But this idea that who are the people in your life that the time spent with them is at a greater value than the minutes passed. The typical fast food restaurant requires 8 employees to function. Brasa, Michelle Falcone's restaurant in Canada, requires 5 people to operate. So stop and think about that. He doesn't have to pay for those extra 3 people because he's focused on talent density, which also means he can pay those 5 people more, which makes his position in the marketplace better, which increases his retention, which increases his engagement, which results in no one leaving and no one showing up for work late. Why? Because he spent the time on the front end to hire people whose value is greater. And this ties back to what you said about Cameron Harold. He hires for who they are as a person, not their skill set. So many businesses spend days putting together job descriptions where they're like, needs to be able to understand Microsoft Word. It's like, really? If it's 2022, you're going to be able to find out if somebody understands Word or not. That shouldn't be in your description, okay? But instead, you should be looking for things like, give me an example of a time that you went above and beyond what was expected to make sure that the product got delivered or that the goal got achieved. Give me an example of a time where you did something that wasn't in your job description because it was the right thing to do. What did you do and why? These are the types of questions we need to be asking in our interviews instead of, well, how many words do you type a minute? Or tell me about, where you see yourself in 10 years. These are just filler, ridiculous questions as opposed to questions that get to the type of person they are and the value they'll be able to provide.
Wow. How do people follow you or keep on track and be aware of when your next book's coming out?
The best place to find me is at my website, joeycoleman.com. That's Joey, like a baby kangaroo or a 5-year-old, Coleman, Coleman, like the camping equipment, but no relation, joeycoleman.com. There'll be information about there. Like I said, we're about just a little under a year out from the book coming out, but I continue to kind of put it together, and I'll be speaking about it, and there'll be all kinds of information about it there. And if you want to get a preview of what the employee book is going to be like, check out the book, Never Lose a Customer Again, which is the customer experience book. It's the same 8 phases that I talk about in there, just turned internally on your organization instead of external towards your customers.
Now, I've seen that presentation. I've seen that presentation twice. And for people out there that are looking for stars on your stage, I'm going to personally vouch for Joey now. He's great. He's brilliant. Not as good looking as me, but he's wonderful. He drops nuggets. So if you've enjoyed this show, just imagine what you'll get out of him in front of your audience. Joey, thank you very much for spending your time with us today.
Oh, Steve, thanks so much. And thanks to everybody who was kind enough to listen in. I wish you all the best as you create remarkable experiences for your customers and your employees every day.
See you later, pal. Bye. Hey, I hope you liked that episode of the Art of Making Things Happen podcast. And remember, these are done for you. If you like them, subscribe, share them around. But if you don't like them, send me an email to ask@steveDsims.com and you can tell me what I need to do to make this the most dynamic podcast you listen to. Anyway, make sure whatever you learned from the last podcast, you actually do something with. Without action, it's just a bunch of people blowing air. Have a good time. Until next time. Bye.